Welcome back to the Practical Church Podcast. My name is Dylan Dotson and I'm your host. And on this podcast, we help you lead, grow, and build healthy churches. Of course, this podcast is put in partnership with Mission Support. Mission Support knows you want to be effective in ministry, but if you're like most pastors, it's really easy to feel weighed down and maybe stressed out by all the different things you have going on. And so Mission Support comes alongside pastors and church leaders just like you to give you the expertise to do the things that you might not have or might not want to do. Whether it's things like bookkeeping, SEO, payroll, websites, or any of their other services, make sure you check out missionsupport.com and go from feeling scattered to focused on your mission. It is possible to love being a pastor again. Check out missionsupport.com. And of course, if you want to check out the Practical Church newsletter, which comes out every other Wednesday with more practical tips and advice, you can go to missionsupport.com/practical to sign up there. Now, today on the episode, I'm going to share with you 6 tips for running highly engaged small groups or a small group ministry at your church. What are the things that you can do to go from maybe being frustrated to things not going well to getting your church aligned and on the same page and have a high rate of engagement and participation in your groups? That's what we're going to talk about on this episode. All right, 6 tips for running a highly engaged small groups ministry at your church, community groups, life groups, missional communities. This isn't so much necessarily like whatever you call them or necessarily how to run them, or although I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. But whatever you call your groups, man, how can you do them well and have them highly engaged? I want to say 2 things, practical things, before I get into like how to actually do this well, okay? 2 things I want to mention at the start. One is I want to start out by mentioning the fact that groups are a point of frustration and discouragement for many pastors and many church leaders, right? Many of us in our current culture, like groups are a way we do discipleship, build community, especially in the West and America. And there's a lot of maybe discouragement or disillusionment because like maybe you hear other churches doing it well and you can't seem to get the thing off the ground. Maybe you don't have enough groups. Maybe you don't know like what the group should be running or maybe how to equip or train group leaders. And so that's a problem. So I just want to say it is a discouragement for many people. Man, how can you run groups well? Now, there's not a silver bullet necessarily, but I do want to just share one thing that churches that run groups well do versus those that struggle with it. And here's the main primary difference. The biggest single factor for you to run groups well in your church is consistency in how you run them. Consistency in how you run them. Now, I'm going to get into how to be consistent here in a second, but I just want to say this. If your groups are all structured differently, going through different things, there's not like a very clear path on how to join one or how to start one or how to make new groups, it's going to be really, really hard. If all groups are kind of doing their own thing, you don't really know how to train your group leaders because groups are different. It's just difficult. The churches that have consistency in how they do groups, how they run groups, how they operate, and those that do not, and that's the biggest primary difference. My guess, and it's not, there's exceptions to this, it's not always true, but my guess is if you're frustrated at the lack of engagement of people in groups at your church or the lack of groups that you have or the need to have more, and it's not going well, there probably isn't consistency. This is what a group looks like at our church. So I just want to say that's the biggest difference. So this episode, how to be consistent and maybe what should they look like. Okay, so here we go. 6 tips for running highly engaged small group ministry at your church. Here's point number 1. That all groups should have the same curriculum. All groups should be doing the exact same thing. And I would encourage you that it should be provided by the church, by your church, and say, this is what it looks like to do. At our church, I'll use community groups, that's what we call them. At New City, community groups look like this. And they all look relatively the same. Now, this does not mean that people can't do other Bible studies or things, discipleship groups, whatever, in your church if they want. But in New City's case, it is not a community group. A community group at New City is sermon-based. Many of the groups share a meal or share a snack ahead of time. We write, I write it typically because I preach most weeks. I write a community group leader guide. Brian, who runs our groups, he's the one that sends it out on Thursday before that Sunday so people have it for the group leader guide. But it's the exact same. Everyone's reading the same thing. They're asking the same questions. It has the exact same format. Now, it doesn't have to be sermon-based. I think that's easiest, A, because you already have the content, you don't have to always wonder what study should we do next. And B, the homework's already done. So a lot of times people want to do they want to do a book study or whatever, or some devotional, whatever, that requires homework, and everybody says they want to do it. Then nobody ends up doing it, or if they do it, they're doing it like on the ride to their group. Not a good thing. Sermon-based, the homework's already done for those who have listened to the sermon, and it gives a starting point for discussion. Now, again, people can do other things. It just can't be called a community group or whatever you call your group. So, for example, I do a discipleship group with every 9 months with 3 different guys at New City. It's different. We've got another person that leads a Bible study. We've got a woman at our church that leads a women's Bible study. Those things are great, but they're just not community groups. Now, we do at New City ask our partners to be a part of a group. We are actually okay if it's a community group or maybe a Bible study or discipleship, if it's something else. It's not like it has to be a community group. We just want them to be in a group. However, the vast majority of people that are in a group are in a community group that is sermon-based with the same curriculum. I know there's always pushback because every once in a while, you will get a leader that wants to do something different, or their group says they want to do something different. I'm going to talk more as we go through this about why that's a legitimate pushback, but why you should not give in to that, okay? Again, if you want groups to run well, they have to be consistent. And you cannot tell people, here's what a community group is, or you cannot promote your groups and be able to explain what they are if not all groups are uniform in some way. Of course, the experience is going to be a little bit different, the environment, the discussion, how many questions they get through, it's not always the same. But hey, when someone signs up for a community group at New City Church, this is exactly what it looks like. So all groups should have the same curriculum. Otherwise, it's going to be really hard for you to place someone in a group if you're not exactly sure what that group is going over. Or even if, let's say you have 5 groups, I don't know, and they're all doing something different, and somebody signs up for a group at your church. Well, how do you explain to them what groups are, how they operate, what they look like? How do you explain them? How do you know that your group leaders are actually doing the homework every week or picking quality stuff that's not heretical or bad, but it's actually helpful? So again, all groups, whatever the curriculum is, I personally recommend sermon-based because it's going with the sermon, you're on top of it, whatever. The church should provide it, pick it, and say, hey, here's what we're doing as a church. You can do other Bible studies and stuff if you want, but hey, I would just say, hey, the church should provide it. It should be the same for every group. It's really hard to tell a new person or who's interested in a group and they sign up for a group, what groups are like, if you can't explain to them succinctly how they operate and what they go over. So all groups should have the same curriculum if you want them to be consistent. Number 2, you must communicate this and hold the line on this. So this kind of goes with it. You have to communicate. All groups do this. And then when you have pushback, explain, here's why we do groups. And it's okay that people can disagree. So you just have to do it. So we've done, we're about a little over 7 years in. We've probably done sermon-based community groups for 6 years. And every once in a while, we've had some pushback and people want to do their own things. And in the past, we've actually been somewhat lenient towards it. We're not anymore because we've gone through a couple of things in the last year that really solidify this is not good. For example, last year, we had a couple who was leading a group that was community group based. And then eventually they went away from that and we weren't sure. Again, we're much better at now, communicating and talking with people what they're doing. But this group, great leaders, they were really involved in the church. And they started doing a Bible study, based off of a book, like a book Bible study thing. And eventually they left New City and they eventually moved away. They stopped coming to New City and nobody in their group could then lead their community group. Because when you do a book study that requires a bit more work and effort, it's a little bit harder to do. And because they were doing that for the past 3 or 4 or 5 months, we had some newer people join their group. They were new to New City, and they didn't know what a normal community group even looked like. So none of the people in that group could lead a New City community group because they didn't even have it modeled for them. And so this couple left New City, and they moved away, and it was actually not the best experience because then we had to get people in different groups because none of them could lead the group because they didn't even know how a New City group runs. And part of it for us, if somebody wants to lead a group at New City, they do need to be a part of a New City community group first. And so again, one of the issues, if you don't have a similar curriculum, is that if your groups are leading all these different things and that one of those group leaders moves away or leaves the church for whatever reason, it's a lot harder to have a new leader if a new leader is not sure how to run things the way that they run them, especially if they required a lot of outside prep and study to actually lead the group. So for us, again, a New City community group is sermon-based. It makes it really easy, by the way, to start new groups, or if somebody moves on, to have somebody in that group become the leader because they've seen it modeled. This is exactly what a group looks like. Because we provide the curriculum, honestly, anybody could do it. In New City's case, and I know there's different philosophies for different churches, in New City's case, our group leaders are much more facilitators than necessarily leaders. Now, of course, they are leaders, and it takes leadership to lead a group well. But at the end of the day, the group itself is like, here's the guide. You read some verses, we give you a little explanation, here's a few questions. Read some more verses, get a little explanation, read some more questions. Again, if you go to missionsupport.com/practical, you can sign up for the Practical Church newsletter. I've actually sent, somewhat recently, I sent practically here's what our community group leader guides actually look like. So be sure to get to the subscribe to the newsletter so you can get stuff like that sent right to you. But it's very clear. In fact, in our group, what we actually started doing somewhat recently is because it's so easy to lead a discussion, how we have things set up, is that actually every week in our group, we have somebody else lead the discussion. Because everyone's seen how it's modeled, and it's super easy to do. And here's what it does. When we need to start a new group, which we'll talk about starting new groups here in a second, it's super easy to have new leaders because they all run the same. And they're like, oh, this is how we do groups. They're not hard. I could do that. We want our people thinking, I could do that. Because that is the biggest, that's how you start new groups. The people who are comfortable and confident in doing it. Again, if everybody is not just hosting a group, but your leaders have to lead and pick a Bible study and do the research and do the prep beforehand, it's going to be really hard to sustain multiple groups having that model. So you must communicate this and hold the line and explain, here is why we do sermon-based groups, or here's why we do blank groups. It's not that these other things are wrong. People can do the other groups. It's just not a community group, because when people sign up for groups and when we talk about groups, we need to be able to easily explain what they are. And so you go, well, you want to hold the line. You got to communicate. Here's why we do groups this way, and hold the line on it, even when people push back. Of course, there are some negatives to making everybody do the same thing. I'm not saying it's the best thing ever. But consistency, again, that's the biggest reason people have frustration with community groups or small groups or whatever you call your groups at your church, is a lack of consistency. If they're all running the same, it's easy to start more of them. It's easy to get people plugged into them, because then the only differentiating factor really is the night and the location. It's not necessarily the curriculum. It's just the night and location. And that's really the only thing you have to think about when getting people plugged into your groups. Number 3, highly recommend that your groups should run all on the same schedule. In other words, another issue with the inconsistency that churches have with groups is everybody's doing groups kind of whenever they want to do them. I'm not saying New City's model is the best way. What we do is we take 3 group breaks throughout the year, and then we're running groups the rest of the time. And so when we take group breaks, we actually recommend that our groups not meet, or if they want to meet, they can just do a social to hang out. We don't send community group leader guides. We're very clear, you're on break. Part of that is that we want to be proactive. We want people to sustain for the long haul. And if somebody signs up for a group and they're just in it forever, they're more likely to burn out, as opposed to having pre-set in breaks. People are more likely to stick with it because they know that I'm not doing this 52 weeks out of the year, or at least there's a clear structure. And so for us, we take 3 community group leader breaks, or 3 community group breaks. When we're on break, we write no leader guide. Now, the one flexibility we have here at New City, and maybe one day we'll change this, but how we do it now is that the groups either meet every week or every other week. So some groups meet every week, some groups meet every other week. Now, regardless of when they meet, they're all running the same or going over the same curriculum that week. And so sometimes, especially for the groups that meet every other week, when we take a community group break, they might do their own thing for a week or two. They might just do a social. They might just hang out because they don't meet as frequently, so they still want to get together. But regardless, we're very clear. We're not sending anything out, and we're not asking you to do anything. If you run on the same schedule, it's also easier for people to get plugged into them. The easiest way to get new people into a group is actually to start new groups. Of course, and we do this too. You can add new people to existing groups. But there's something special, especially if you're new to the church, joining a group with other new people. So what we do is that we often, when we need new groups, is we take the time when we take a break and we're going back into groups. That's when we start a new group, because we're talking about it for a couple of weeks before groups get back up. So we're going to get more signups. And so if we're full-on groups, for example, we'll wait until our next break to start a new group. We'll let people know, hey, the preference that you have, we don't have a group available at this point or this time, but we actually have this group starting in a couple weeks or a couple months. And we will reach out back to you, which we do. We notate it and we reach out to people. We don't make them reach back out to us, but have them run on the same schedule and have them take breaks at the same time. Now, of course, during our community group sessions, groups can cancel if people are going to be out, or every once in a while, even in the midst of our normal group schedule, if you just want to have a social and go out to dinner together or just hang out, you can do that as well. It's just consistency. Here's when groups are on, here's when groups are off. And then, of course, the leaders can have flexibility if they need to cancel or they want to do a social or whatever, depending on what's going on. But it's very clear, here is when we're doing groups. So again, increases the consistency, and it takes the variability out of it. That it's not on the leader to decide when we're meeting and when we're not. I would recommend that groups would run on the same schedule and proactively take some breaks throughout the year. Number 4, this is also important, is that you need to plan for childcare. You need to plan for childcare. So again, if you have families at your church, people with kids, what are you going to do about it? If you put it on the families to figure out childcare all on their own, you're going to have a lot less participation in groups. And so just know that, and don't let that frustrate you if that's the case. I highly recommend what we've done from the beginning at New City is that we actually have a childcare budget. We help reimburse for childcare for anybody who's in a group. Now, part of it is we ask our partners at New City to be in a group if they're going to be partners. And so we don't think it's fair to make our parents pay for something or people pay for something that we're asking them to do. Now, some groups, will actually like pay a babysitter to go, maybe they got a house or a room, they put all the kids in one room, they have a babysitter and they bring them all there. Other groups will have people will leave their kids at home and have a babysitter go to their own house, and then everybody comes to the house, unless the group leader that has kids, obviously the babysitter will be at their house, but everyone else's kids, they leave them at home. And we offer it. Now, here's what's interesting. A lot of people, not everybody signs up for the reimbursement. And so you'll be surprised if and when you offer this, how many people don't take you up on it. But it's still really helpful to be able to say, hey, we have this if you need it. It's also helpful because many people do. So this is a line item that you'll have to budget in your budget. And so yes, it's an expense, but if groups and community are important for you and people have kids, then you have to be able to provide childcare. I know some people, it's personal preference. Again, so caveat that. I'm not personally a fan of having kids in the small group session itself, because especially in our culture today, we have less places where friendship is being developed. We've all got phones, we've all got Netflix, we've all got entertainment. So we go to our jobs, we go home. People are more lonely and isolated than they've ever been before. And so groups are a way for adults to actually have relationships and connection with one another. And it's really hard if kids are running around. So that's also why we offer childcare. So I would recommend you need to have some sort of plan. And if you want groups to run well, you need to offer to pay for it. If you want more people to sign up, you offer to pay for it. Now, it's interesting, again, not everybody will pay for it or ask to be reimbursed or want to be reimbursed, but the fact that you offer it really encourages your people and shows them that you care, you know it's an expense, and that groups are actually important to you. It's going to cost you money. Anything that actually is valuable, it costs us money, financial resources. And so you need to plan for childcare. If you want more families to be involved in groups, you're going to have to put it in your budget. What we do is simply a Google form. So people fill out a Google form at the end of the month. Brian, our groups director, or among other things, writes people a check to reimburse them for that month. And so we use a Google form. You can do whatever you want. But you need a plan for childcare if you want people with kids to be involved and not just up to them to pay for everything. Number 5, start new groups. Do not multiply groups. Do not multiply groups. I know this is a little, Larry Osborne has a book, Sticky Church, really helpful, talks about this idea as well. Everyone talks about multiplying groups, and this idea, if you don't mind multiply a group, you're kind of cliquish. Can I just say, if you've been a part of groups that multiply, yes, there are exceptions of this. But what we really mean by multiply is split. What we really mean is split. And there's been churches that my wife and I have been a part of in the past where we've had to quote unquote multiply a group, which really meant split the group. And it's always hard because who goes to what group? Really, you have to get people to leave because nobody really wants to leave. And it's always messy and it's always difficult. Again, because we want to create places where people can actually have friendships at New City, and I think at your church as well, we actually cap our groups. And where groups are full, we don't put anyone else in that group. Now, we live in an area where people move around a lot, so there's always people moving and coming. But if a group is full, no one else is in that group. And because if you keep putting people in the group, then the discussion goes down for everybody. We found 12 to 14, really 14 is probably too much, about 12 people is the max. Well, we'll cap the group and we'll start new groups if we need them. What that does is it allows intimacy to develop. If you really want to go deep with people and walk with Jesus well, it's going to take over a year. And oftentimes what happens when you multiply groups, it's really just the same handful of group leaders because they do such a good job. They're the ones that multiply, or what it feels like to them, they get punished every year and everyone else doesn't. So I would recommend not multiplying your groups, but starting new groups. And by the way, this is why the first point is so important. That if everybody does the same curriculum, this is so much easier to do. It is so much easier to do if somebody has seen how to do a group and they think, oh, I could do that. And so they start a group. And so what happens for us when we start new groups, again, we take a leader or the leaders out of their current group, we have them start a new group, and we don't ask anyone else in their current group to go with it. So these are people that said they'd like to lead a group, or we ask them to lead a group. They leave the group, everybody else stays, and we give them a whole group of new people, a good number of these new people are probably new people to our church. And it's super easy to do because they know exactly what it looks like to lead a group. And we make it really easy at New City to lead a group. So you want to start new groups. My biggest recommendation is like you take breaks, and then coming out of the break is when you start a new group. You really want to get at least 8 people ideally to sign up for a new group. Otherwise it can get like really difficult because if people don't come every week, you can have 4 to 6 people. If you do that after a while, it gets really, really discouraging. So again, don't multiply groups, start new groups. Again, I mentioned earlier, right now at our group, like we have someone else lead it every single discussion. And can I tell you, like everybody in our group could easily lead their own community group at New City Church. They've seen how they've done it, how to do it. They've all done it at our group at least once. And it's like, man, you can have people, again, for us, I want to maybe make this caveat. Obviously, there's a spiritual maturity you want your group leaders to have at your church. Yes. But what's funny is like, man, there'll be people in our group, for example, who maybe don't talk a lot, who maybe you don't think like, how do I say this? I'll just put it this way. They don't always talk a lot during the discussion. But when they lead community group, they do a great job, like a surprisingly great job. And because we make it so easy, we give you the guide, you just read the guide, ask the questions, facilitate the conversation. Man, anybody can do it. And it's really hard to start new groups if your group leaders don't know what curriculum they're going to be using, that they have to come up with it and they got to figure it out. That's not a good way to start new groups. If they're all consistent, it's super easy to do because they know how to do it and they've been a part of a group and they've probably thought, oh, I could do that. So my recommendation for you, again, I say this a lot, so this isn't new if you're necessarily new to the Practical Church podcast. Do not multiply your groups. Cap them. I know it feels cliquish. I would argue that it's not, and it's actually much healthier because what happens is you get a couple of groups that are way too large. Because you didn't cap them, it doesn't force you to start new groups, and so you don't because nobody wants to leave their group. And then you got a couple of really low quality groups because you got 20 people a part of it. Nobody really talks. Nobody feels like they're going to be missed if they're not there because there's so many people, and the conversation just isn't great because there's way too many people. So I would recommend capping your groups and starting new groups. That's what we do in New City, and I guarantee you, I know it's only anecdotal, our experience. We would have fewer groups at New City Church if we did the multiplied group model. If we allowed some of our groups to get too big and we split them, forced half of the group to go somewhere else, man, we would not have as many groups as we have at New City Church. One of the things we do well, so we do a lot of things well, we have a very high percentage of people engaged or a part of a New City community group because we make these so easy to run and they're very consistent in what they actually look like. I would recommend, again, not multiplying groups, but starting brand new groups. Take the leader out, say, I'm going to give you all new people. And then that's how you go about starting new groups at your church. It's easy to do, again, if all groups run the same. And then last but not least, number 6, the 6th tip for helping to run highly engaged small groups at your church is that you should take group attendance. You should take group attendance so you actually know, not like I think this person shows up or sometimes, but you actually know. So this helps in terms of like capping group. 12 is an ideal number, but if you've got some people that if you got some groups or some people don't attend consistently as others, or some people like be in the group, well, you can maybe put another group, a person or two in that group, or you can have a conversation, or you can figure out what's going on. It's hard to track Sunday attendance in terms of like individual names. Obviously, you can track how many people were there, but for group attendance, you actually can track individual names. So it's actually really easy to see like what's going on in these people's lives. Are they showing up? Do they stop showing up? And so what we have done, we actually just changed how we've done this. So there's 2 ways. I mean, there's probably many ways. There's 2 ways that we've done at New City. One is by Google Sheets. And so a Google Sheet was made for each one of our group leaders with all the dates and with everyone in their group. And every week they would just go in and mark on X for everybody who was in the group that week. So we can see their attendance. We can see how frequently people were showing up, how infrequently people were showing up. We've recently transitioned that to Planning Center groups. I don't know how it all works because I don't run it, but we use Planning Center. I know many of you guys do as well. They have a groups feature and works really well. And you actually can track attendance through groups feature. Through the groups feature, and it sends you reminders and all that sort of thing. And it's a little bit easier than a Google Sheet. And so we use Planning Center groups to track group attendance. But you can track it, and you can actually see who is showing up and who's not. Again, if there's sometimes we run into issues where like people want to join a group, but they maybe live like 20, 30 minutes away from the church, and so there's only like 1 or 2 groups that's a good option for them. And so we can look at that group and be like, okay, this group is full. Which people aren't showing up that much? Are they actually full or are they not? Right, so there's things you can figure out by tracking group attendance and see what's going on in the lives of your people. I highly recommend track group attendance. Now, again, know that you're going to have to like follow up pretty much every week. So some people will do this every week. and half of people will never do it unless you ask them. And so you do need to follow up. It is very unhelpful if only certain groups track their attendance. And so whoever runs your groups is going to have to follow up, say, hey, can you send this? Hey, can you update this? Pretty much like every week. We send our group leader guide out and send a reminder every week. And so that's a great way to do that as well. Like, hey, reminder, here are your things. When we were doing Google Sheets, Brian in his email would actually link everybody's sheet he would BCC all the group leaders. And also like, hey, here's the group leader guide, let me know if you have any questions. And then he would link everybody's Google Sheet in the email. So all they had to do is click on it and update their attendance if they haven't done it. So that's a great way to see engagement, who's actually involved in your church. And so we actually know too, like how many people are like right now involved in New City Church. I could tell you like in groups, I could actively tell you. And it's just a good metric to track otherwise, just in general, but especially with small groups. And so those are 6 tips for running highly engaged small groups ministry at your church. Again, my biggest thing, as I said in the beginning, consistency. Consistency. We recommend small group or sermon-based, but it can be whatever you want. Communicate this and be very clear. This is what a group looks like at our church. People, if you're comfortable with it, are welcome to do other things. When people sign up for a group, we're not going to push them to that other thing. It can be word of mouth, and you're happy if it's something you're comfortable with. You're happy to like tell people when you talk to them or whatever. But like from stage or from when we talk about groups, that is not a group, and so we're not going to like funnel people to that thing because it's not a group. But you're welcome to do it on your own. Have them run on the same schedule. Make sure you account for childcare. Start new groups. Don't split them. And take group attendance. I think if you do those things and you're consistent with it, that will help you maybe take some of the frustration away and allow you to run highly engaged small groups at your church. Here's my observation for this episode. It's also kind of a recommendation. I was thinking about it last week, but when it comes to like communicating changes at your church, sometimes it can be difficult of like when and where and how to do it. One of the best things that I have found that I found helpful to do is to take advantage of one-on-one meetings when you're meeting with people to share vision and just tell them why you're doing certain things at your church. Whether it's changes that you're making or just making sure they're aligned and that they know. And so like many of you, if you're a pastor, ministry leader, you might meet with multiple people a week. That's what I do. And so regardless, what I often do is that regardless of whatever we're meeting for, typically maybe towards the end of the conversation, if things are kind of wrapping up, I will often take the time to let them know of any changes that are going on, especially if it's relevant to the area that they serve or things that they do, or just like big things that we've been thinking through as a church, as a staff, as an elder team. And it makes people feel like really engaged and valued, and it's a way to get people's feedback. And so we're making some changes like right now at New City about frequency of how often people are going to be serving at New City, as well as our assimilation process. That's changing. Now, we're going to do a vision night on July 18th, which the timing of that is not great because it's literally in the middle of the summer, but for various reasons, like that's when we have to do it. So that's when we're doing it. And what I've started doing in some of these one-on-one meetings is I've actually started to tell people some of the things that we're going to be communicating so that they already know. So that they're already bought in, which is helpful as well, because they get like one-on-one like feedback and they can ask their questions and they can feel heard. Now, I'm not going to go through like all of this stuff. For example, right now that we're going to do this vision night, I'm not going to go through all of it when I meet with people, but with certain of our leaders, I'm kind of letting them know, here's some changes we're making and here's why. What that will do is that, again, when we have this vision night, it's not going to be completely new to a lot of people, and you're going to have people that are already bought in. And so, man, when appropriate, I would just encourage you, when you're meeting with people, to also bring up changes that are going on in the church, to help people feel bought in, to help people to explain more of the reasoning behind that you can't always explain from stage, to show people like, oh, they've really thought through this. Like, I trust their decision-making in this, which will also allow them to trust your decision-making in other things, because they're like, well, I'm not sure why they're doing this, but I do know that they're thoughtful and they're thinking through why they do the things that they do. And so all that to say, my observation has been just take advantage of one-on-one meetings with people to share changes and visions at your church. It gets people engaged, makes them feel like they're a part of what you're doing. It allows them to ask questions, and it's something that I found helpful to do in my ministry. Here is the personal growth tip for this episode. Let me tell you why it is okay to cut your goals in half. Here's why it's okay to cut your goals in half. Here's the reality. That improvement at the end of the day is more important than hitting a goal. Weight loss, Bible reading plan, relationship with your spouse, your kids, whatever goals that you have, hobby you want to get better in. It's at the end of the day, what's most important is not hitting a goal. It's improving. And now goals can help us improve, but the goal is not the thing. It's improving the thing that's most important. And so here's what we know, right? We all know what it's like to set a goal, make strides towards that goal, you're seeing some improvement, then you realize you're not actually going to hit the goal you originally set, and then you slowly give up entirely. So you have a goal, you want to go for it, man, things are tracking, life gets in the way, you kind of get off kilter a little bit, you realize you're not going to hit the goal that you originally set, and so you just give up entirely. But here's the reality. Did you know, and of course you do know, but do you realize that hitting 50% of a goal is much better than giving up? In fact, my guess is at the beginning of your journey towards whatever goal you're trying to hit, you would have loved to have been 50% ahead of where you were when you started. You would have loved that. And so instead of quitting on a goal that you might not hit, just change the goal to encourage yourself to keep making progress. So if losing 30 pounds, if you've lost 30 pounds when your goal was 50 pounds, you've still made progress. Like you haven't failed. If your goal was 50 pounds, you've lost 30, then you've made progress. Running a 5K when your goal was to run 10 miles is still progress. Reading 10 books when your goal was to read 20 books is still progress. All of those things are still greater than zero. And so all that to say, don't give up if you realize that the goal you set was too lofty. Oftentimes in the beginning, we do set goals that are too lofty because we just don't know the resistance and the challenges that we are going to face. Instead, when that happens, simply change your goal and keep making progress. If you're not going to hit your goal, don't give up. Change your goal, cut it in half, but keep making progress. And today's ministry question comes from Richie on the Practical Church Facebook group. Be sure to check out the Practical Church Facebook group. If you're on Facebook, you can ask questions, get them answered. Richie asked this. Well, this is kind of a statement that he made, and then I'm going to give some feedback answer to it. He eventually goes on to say this. I think when we make our connection card announcement, so he's talking about his announcement time during the service, we don't have any variation in it, and it almost feels like that commercial that comes on every 2 minutes. How do we keep it fresh so it doesn't always sound like a commercial? After 3 months, phew, LOL. His point is, he has a connect moment. They talk about their connect card, but they say the same thing every week, and it sounds like a commercial that keeps coming up over and over and over again. How do we keep it fresh? Here's my encouragement to you. This is actually a great thing to do. I would not change it up as long as your announcement is to the point and not too long. I would keep using the same exact language, and I would also mention the connect card every single week. The only thing is you got to keep it to 30 to 45 seconds. Otherwise, it does become a drowning thing and a boring thing, and people that tune out of. So here's the thing. You want to mention your connect card every single week because you'll have new guests every single week. And even if you don't have new guests every single week, you want your people to know that if I invite somebody, they're going to be acknowledged. It's going to be acknowledged that new people come to our church in a non-awkward manner. I highly recommend using the same wording every week. And this is a somewhat recent episode. I kind of talked through this on the podcast. So you can go back. I can't remember which one it was exactly off the top of my head. The language is great. That way, no matter who is doing your connect moment, they're saying the same thing. Let me just show you how we do ours, okay? We come up, the very first next step, we call it next step announcement, every single week is this. We have the connect card. Whoever's doing next steps has the connect card with them. They show the connect card. They say, hey, thanks so much for joining us at New City Church. If you're new with us, there's a connect card in the seat back in front of you or the seat below you. If you fill that out, you can drop it off with me. We have our person that does next step also go to our connect table after the service. At our teal table in the lobby as you head out after the service today, and we'll hand you a Chick-fil-A gift card just to say thanks for joining us today. Alternatively, you can text NCC Connect to 97,000 if you'd like to do it digitally. We also know that finding a new church can be really, really hard and awkward. You may not know everybody. You might not know the songs. And so we recommend that you try 3 at New City. We ask that you would come back 3 times because we think after 3 weeks, you'll really have a chance or have an idea of knowing whether or not this is the church for you. That's what we say. The spiel is very close, very similar to that every single week, no matter who's doing it. It's short, to the point, it recognizes new people, and it allows our people to know, hey, we're going to, say something if somebody's actually new. All that to say, I would keep the same thing. I know it might feel boring for you. I have never had in the history of New City Church, had one person ever complain. Why do we mention the connect card every week? Because they get it. Now, again, if you're going 1 or 2 minutes and it's like not necessarily the same thing or people kind of say the same thing, but they don't, that's not a good thing. You want to keep it short and sweet to the point. My recommendation is come up with you write it out. This is exactly what we want our people who are doing next steps to say and have them pretty much memorize it. I want you to say this. And I don't even want you to vary from this because when people start to vary from it, sometimes they can be nervous, awkward. They can say things that come across as weird or pushy unintentionally. And so that's the language that I've just shared that we followed on. I would highly recommend mentioning it every week, keeping it the same every week because your people might be used to it, but new people are not. And as long as it's short, your people will not tune out. They come to expect expect it. They know that you're going to acknowledge new people. They're grateful that if they invite a friend, they're going to be acknowledged in a non-awkward way, and you keep going with the service. Keep it the same, keep it punchy, keep it 30 to 45 seconds, and keep going, but that's my recommendation. Say the same thing every week so that it's very clear what you want your new people to do. Well, thanks so much again for joining me today on the Practical Church Podcast. If you want to subscribe, we're on wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're listening to the podcast version, we also have a YouTube account, YouTube version. And so you can go on YouTube and you can watch the video if you want as well. And you can subscribe there. Also, if you want more from me, head to missionsupport.com/practical. You can submit a question for a future episode. You can sign up for the Practical Church newsletter, which is different content than what we share on this episode. It's not just regurgitated. So be sure to get that, missionsupport.com/practical. And check out Mission Support if you're feeling overwhelmed in ministry. Talk to one of their guides and see if they can help you go from feeling stressed to love being ministry. Again, thanks for being with us, and we'll be back with you on the next episode of Practical Church Podcast.